Hi students, welcome to lesson 17, Associative Social Processes, Cooperation, Accommodation and Assimilation. Human society is a continuous form of socio-cultural process. They are fundamental to the life of community. The manner in which the social relations of the members of a group are brought together acquire a certain character. Social relationships involve reciprocal obligations, statuses and ends and means between two or more actors in mutual contact. They refer to a pattern of interaction between the individuals. Thus, social relationships may be studied by the kind or mode of interaction they exhibit. These kinds or modes of interaction are called social processes. Social processes are the fundamental ways in which men interact and establish relationships. These socio-cultural processes are fundamental to the very survival and existence of society, which bring about association and integration in society. In each society, two types of processes remain active, which either integrate or disintegrate the social organization. These are called associative or integrative processes which strengthen the social ties. Cooperation, accommodation and assimilation are prominent among associative or integrative processes. Dissociative or disintegrative processes which weakens the social ties. Competition, conflicts are prominent among the dissociative or disintegrative processes. The balance of these different processes is called social organization. Objectives. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to understand the associative or integrative social processes like cooperation, integration, assimilation, accommodation, identify different types of cooperation, the factors favoring and hindering assimilation, different forms of accommodation, identify differences between accommodation and assimilation. Let us now discuss about the associative or integrative processes. Social relationships represent the functional aspects of society. They involve reciprocal obligations, reciprocal statuses and reciprocal ends and means as between two or more actors in mutual contact. Thus, social relationships may be studied by the kind or mode of interaction they exhibit. These modes of interaction which take place to bring about association or integration are referred as associative or integrative process. Let us now discuss about cooperation. Cooperation is one of the most basic, pervasive and continuous social processes. It is the very basis of social existence. It is a form of social interaction wherein two or more persons work together to gain common end. Cooperation is possible only when there is sympathy, identification, like-mindedness, similarity of purpose, mutual awareness, understanding and selfless attitude. Cooperation is the basis of social life and whole structure of society depends upon that. Let us now talk about types of cooperation. McIver and Page have divided cooperation into two main types, namely direct cooperation and indirect cooperation. In direct cooperation, the individuals have identical functions and have common tasks. The indispensable feature of this type of cooperation is that people do such identical function which they can also do independently. However, owing to bonds of togetherness and solidarity, people come together to perform different activities together. This type of cooperation is voluntary. For example, cooperation between husband and wife, teacher and student, master and servant, etc. In indirect cooperation, people work individually for attainment of common goal and people do unlike tasks. Cooperation is based on division of labor. In the modern technological age, specialization of skills and function are more required, for which indirect cooperation is rapidly replacing direct cooperation. A.W. Green has classified cooperation into three main categories such as primary cooperation, secondary cooperation and tertiary cooperation. Primary cooperation is found in primary groups like family and has identity of ends. Secondary cooperation is found in secondary groups and is highly formalized and specialized. There is loyalty towards the group. It is found in secondary groups such as government, industry, trade union and church, etc. For example, in an industry, each may work in cooperation with others for his own wages, salaries, promotion, profits and in some cases prestige and power. Tertiary cooperation is in big groups and it is also called as accommodation. The two groups may cooperate and work together for antagonistic goals. The attitudes of the cooperating parties are purely opportunistic. The organization of their cooperation is both loose and fragile. Let us now discuss about integration as an associative process. Integration is a process of uniting formerly separate groups into one group with the eradication of separate group differences and identification. The two important levels of integration are integration by commonly held values and integration by interdependence in the division of labor. When basic changes occur in a society, as when new technology is introduced into the economy and the old values become inadequate and the structure serving these values cease to function effectively, then new altered values may be developed and new social forms created or old ones readjusted to serve the altered values. This process serves to maintain integration. Integration is seen as a harmonizing or unifying process whereby the various structural components of society are properly organized. Integration does not involve similarity of various structural parts. The aim of integration is to maintain a harmonious and active relationship between the various structural components of society. It not only keeps the society going, but also imparts a meaning and purpose to the lives of the individuals so that they feel themselves to be a part of a comprehensible and harmonious social life. With the change in the functions of different structural parts, integration becomes necessary to keep the society going. Integration is thus the consequence of differentiation and specialization. The more the differentiation and specialization of functions, the more becomes the need for integration. It is a process of developing a society in which all racial and ethnic groups can share equally in the cultural and economic life. The main difference between assimilation and integration is, assimilation assumes that groups had major cultural differences, whereas integration may occur between groups in the same culture that has been separated by the group loyalties. If culture has to survive, then it must be integrated to a considerable extent. Let us now discuss the problems in integration. Integration becomes difficult owing to the problems in coordinating the structural parts. The size of the group, high heterogeneity, social structure, social change, alienation, cultural lag and other dissociative processes make integration difficult. The modern society, with its elaborate division of labor and complex institutional pattern, is much faced with the difficulty of integration. The complexity of society makes it difficult to coordinate all the structural parts and to socialize all the humans. To bring about harmony and unity among the complex institutional patterns is a formidable task. The problem of integration in a simple and small society is not so complicated as in a complex and large society. The first difficulty is thus the complex and large size of modern society. The second difficulty is presented by cultural heterogeneity. The people in a society belong to many ethnic and racial origins and are marked by class, religious and occupational differentiation. The presence of numerous subcultures within a society adds to the problem of integration. The rapidity of social change is another difficulty in social change. New socio-economic and cultural elements are being introduced at an unprecedented rate. Numerous cultural lags have produced stresses and strains in the interrelated parts of the social web, posing immense challenge to integration. Sometimes the structures of a social system become so rigid that they will not adapt to change. This makes integration a difficult task. In order to remove the strain towards anomie and keep the society ongoing, integration is persistently sought. Beyond the daily reinforcement of integration by normative behavior, the deliberate efforts are also made for bringing about social integration. Thus, ameliorative programs are carried out to decrease delinquency, to educate voters, to provide people to the underprivileged and the overburdened, and to improve education, housing, medical care, recreation and local administration. To some, integration means not only social reform but social reconstruction. They form radical groups who want to abolish the existing social system and organize it in a completely new way. According to them, piecemeal changes do not provide a solid foundation for integration. To them, integration means a new order. All the programs to bring about integration or reintegration involve social planning, which employs research and involves decision and action. Social planning in a democracy is not quite easy. However, it must be admitted that social planning is the most effective method of achieving reintegration in a complex and rapidly changing society. Let us now discuss about assimilation. Assimilation is a type of interaction and refers to a process whereby a group of people, having lived among another group of people for a considerable period of time, adopt the ways of life of latter in such a way as to make it completely indistinguishable from the latter. Let us identify the characteristics of assimilation. Firstly, it is a fusion or blending of two groups according to Young and Mack. Secondly, it signifies both the process of transformation and incorporation. Thirdly, it is the final product of social contacts and is a gradual subconscious two-way process. Fourthly, assimilation is not confined to a single field only. As a group process, assimilation encompasses life in general. Fifthly, assimilation is preceded by another process called acculturation, which is the preliminary and essential step for assimilation. It takes place when one cultural group which is in contact with another borrows from it certain cultural elements and incorporates them into its own culture. The contact between two groups essentially affects both the groups. Usually, the culturally weaker group borrows most of the traits from the culturally stronger group. Sixthly, assimilation is slow and gradual process. Assimilation cannot take place all of a sudden. It takes time. Fusion of personalities and groups usually take time. It occurs only when there is a relatively continuous direct contact. The speed of the process of assimilation depends on the nature of contacts. If the contacts are primary, assimilation occurs naturally and rapidly. On the contrary, if the contacts are secondary and superficial, assimilation takes place very slowly. Let us now discuss the various favoring factors of assimilation. In fact, there are several factors which favor assimilation. Firstly, toleration, which is possible only when the cultural groups are tolerant towards the cultural differences of others. Tolerance helps people to come together, to develop contacts and to participate in common social and cultural activities. Secondly, intimate social relationships and amalgamation. Assimilation is the final product of social contacts. The relative speed in which it is achieved depends on the nature of the contacts and intimacy of social relationships. Amalgamation plays an important role in assimilation. Thirdly, cultural similarity, that is, if there are striking similarities between the main constituents of culture or groups, assimilation takes place quickly. Fourthly, education, which is also an important factor in assimilation. For immigrant people, public education has played a prominent role in providing culture contact. Fifthly, equal social and economic opportunities. People of all groups must have equal access to socio-economic opportunities. Only then they can come closer and establish relations among themselves with mutual trust. There are several factors which hinder assimilation. These are: firstly, isolation. Assimilation is possible only when the groups and individuals are in continuous contact with others. Hence, isolation is negation of assimilation. Not only physical isolation but even mental isolation retards assimilation. Secondly, physical or racial differences. Physical or racial differences are highly discriminating in nature and act as an obstacle in assimilation. Thirdly, cultural differences. If there are no common elements in the two cultures, the groups may remain apart socially even though they happen to stay together physically. Wide cultural differences between groups in customs, religious beliefs, morals, values, languages come in way of assimilation. Fourthly, prejudice. It is the attitude on which segregation depends for its success. As long as the dominant group is prejudiced against a particular group which is kept apart, assimilation cannot take place. Prejudice also hampers assimilation between constituent elements within a given society. Fifthly, dominance and subordination. They often come in the way of close and intimate contact between groups. If the dominant group does not provide equal chances and opportunities for the minority or immigrant groups, assimilation is very slow to take place. The strong feelings of superiority and inferiority associated with dominance and subordination retard the rate of assimilation. Let us now talk about accommodation. Conflict is a continuous though intermittent social process, but life cannot go along if groups are engaged in conflicts. Conflicts are exhausting, if not annihilating. Human social organization is fundamentally the result of an accommodation of conflicting elements. Throughout his life, man has to face a number of conflicting situations. Since conflict cannot continue indefinitely and man doesn't cherish the prospects of conflict, adjustments are always made. Such adjustments that man does continuously to adjust with other people and situations is called accommodation. It is the process of getting along in spite of differences. Adjustment may be to the physical or social environment. Adjustment to the former takes place through organic or structural modification transmitted by heredity and is termed adaptation, while the adjustment to the latter is achieved by an individual through the acquisition of behavioral patterns transmitted socially and through the adoption of new ways of behaving. It is called accommodation. Accommodation is one of the principal types of social process. It is through this process that social order arises. It is a way of inventing social arrangements which help people to work together whether they like it or not. In this, the antagonism between conflicting elements is temporarily regulated and disappears as an overt action. However, it remains latent. J.M. Baldwin, the famous psychologist, was the first to use the concept. The term denotes acquired changes in the behavior of the individuals which help them to adjust to their environment. He also distinguished between adaptation and accommodation. William Ogburn and Mayer Nimcoff define accommodation as a term used by the sociologists to describe the adjustment of hostile individuals or groups. Robert Park and Ernest Burgess mention two types of adjustments: adjustment to new natural conditions and adjustment to new social conditions. The first involves coming in terms with new climate, type of soil, etc., and is often referred to as acclimatization. The second includes adjustment to a new social milieu, that is new folkways, mores and institutions, and is usually called naturalization. Thus, in acclimatization, the person has to change more or less physiologically, a process which we have termed above as adaptation, and in naturalization he has to undergo changes in attitude and behavior which fundamentally involve psychological modification. Let us now discuss the characteristics of accommodation. Firstly, accommodation is natural result of conflict. Since conflicts cannot take place continuously, they make room for accommodation. When parties or individuals involved in conflict do not relish the scene of conflict, they sit down for its settlement. Such settlements, temporary or permanent, may be called accommodation. In the absence of conflicts, the question of arriving at accommodation does not arise. Secondly, accommodation may be conscious or subconscious. Man's adjustment with the social environment is mostly unconscious. The newborn individual learns to accommodate himself with the social order which is dictated by various norms such as customs, morals, traditions, etc. Accommodation becomes conscious when the conflicting individuals and groups make a deliberate and an open attempt to stop fighting and start working together. Thirdly, it is universal, continuous process. Accommodation as a condition and as a process is universal. Human society is composed of antagonistic elements and hence conflicts are inevitable. Since no society can function smoothly in a state of perpetual conflict, accommodation becomes necessary. Thus, accommodation is found in all societies and in all fields of social life. Throughout the life, one has to accommodate oneself with various situations. Further, as and when conflicts take place, sooner or later accommodation would follow. Not only the individuals but also the groups within the society are obliged to accommodate themselves. Fourthly, the effects of accommodation may vary with the circumstances. Accommodation results in many positive aspects, that is, it reduces the conflicts between persons or groups as an initial step towards assimilation. It may serve to postpone outright conflict for a specific period of time, as in a treaty between nations or labor management agreement. It may permit groups marked by sharp socio-psychological distance to get along together. It may prove to be beneficial for the parties involved in it. Sometimes it may help the superior or more powerful party to impose its will on the weaker party. Gillen and Gillen have mentioned these forms of accommodation. Yielding to coercion, use of force to make weaker party accept the conditions of agreement. This can take place when the parties are of unequal strength. It implies the existence of weak and strong in any conflict. Compromise, each group makes some conscious adjustments. Each party to dispute makes some concessions and yields to some demand of the other. The third one is toleration. Conflicts are avoided rather than solved. It is a form of accommodation without formal agreement. There is no settlement of difference, but there is only the avoidance of overt conflict. Conversion, it rejects one's own beliefs, convictions, loyalties and adoption of others. Sublimation, which is substitution of non-aggressive attitudes for the aggressive ones. It may take place at the individual as well as at the group level. This method, suggested by Jesus Christ, Mahatma Gandhi and most of the religious prophets to conquer violence and hatred by love and compassion, is that of sublimation. Rationalization, this involves plausible excuses or explanation for one's behavior. One is not prepared to acknowledge one's failures or defects, for it may indicate guilt or the need for change. Hence, one blames others for one's own fault. By ascribing one's failures to others, instead of accepting one's own defects, one can retain self-respect. Third party compromise comprises of arbitration, mediation and conciliation. Arbitration implies bringing about compromise by the third party whereby the decision of the third party is binding. Labor management disputes, some political disputes are often resolved in this way. In mediation, there is some neutral agent whose efforts are directed to bring peace. However, the decision is not binding on the parties. Conciliation is the attempt to develop friendship between the groups so that they solve their problems on their own. Conciliation implies a milder response to an opponent than coercion. In the end, conciliation, like toleration, opens the door to assimilation. Accommodation is important for any society to bring in cooperation between groups. It helps in adjusting to changed functions and statuses which are brought by social changes. Without accommodation, social life could hardly go on. Since conflict disturbs social integration, disrupts social order and damages social stability, in all societies efforts are made to resolve them at the earliest. Accommodation checks conflicts and helps persons and groups to maintain cooperation. It is a means of resolving conflict without the complete destruction of the opponent. It makes possible cooperation between antagonistic or conflicting elements or parties. Hence, it is often called antagonistic cooperation. Thus, two or more conflicting political parties may come together to forge a union to defend a third party. Accommodation may take place at personal or social level. Let us now discuss the differences between accommodation and assimilation. Accommodation may take place suddenly and in a radical manner, for example, workers starting work after long strike. Whereas, assimilation is slow and a gradual process. For example, immigrants take time to get assimilated with the majority group. Secondly, accommodation may or may not provide permanent solution to group differences and disputes. Only temporary solutions are provided. Whereas, assimilation normally provides a permanent solution to intergroup disputes and differences. The third difference is accommodation is mostly conscious process. For example, labor leaders who come for talks are sufficiently aware of the fact that they are purposefully seeking out a solution to their dispute. Whereas, assimilation is a subconscious process. Individuals and groups involved in it are often not aware of what actually happens within themselves or in their group. Let us now summarize this lesson. Associative social processes are important for the existence of the society since they bring about a sense of cooperation, integration, mutual respect, assimilation and accommodation, and thus try to control the disintegrative tendencies in the society. In modern societies, whereby there is tremendous diversity and heterogeneity, associative social processes are instrumental in bringing about social order in the society.